They never raise their voice. They never rush. Yet somehow, they always seem to be in control. Manipulators do not conquer with strength. They conquer with timing, silence, and the hidden weaknesses of the human ego. Long before modern psychology named these patterns, ancient warriors already understood them. In a mountain province lost to mist and pine, a young warrior believed power came from dominance. He trained his body until it broke, sharpened his mind until it grew rigid, and mistook aggression for strength. Still, every battle left him drained. Every victory felt hollow, and every manipulator he faced somehow walked away untouched. It was not his sword that failed him. It was his presence. An old mentor would later tell him, "Those who manipulate walk a path of fear. If you chase them, you enter their system. If you resist them emotionally, you feed it. But if you stand still, their path collapses beneath their own steps." This story is not about defeating enemies. It is about mastering the ancient system that makes manipulation impossible. A journey through discipline, silence, and inner strength. A transformation where fear dissolves, ego dies quietly, and the warrior learns how to break manipulators, not by fighting them, but by refusing to walk their path at all. Chapter 1. The hidden war of ego and fear. Before the warrior ever lifted a blade, he had already chosen the wrong enemy. He believed strength announced itself. That authority came from force. That silence was weakness waiting to be exposed. In his youth, he trained where stone met wind, courtyards carved into the mountains, wooden pillars scarred by generations of strikes. His body hardened quickly, muscles learned obedience, breath learned rhythm. But his mind remained loud, restless, hungry to be seen. The elders praised discipline of form, yet tested discipline of spirit. They did not challenge him openly. They questioned his decisions in front of others. They delayed his advancement without explanation. They praised him with smiles that carried hidden hooks. He mistook these moments for disrespect. Each time his chest tightened. Each time his thoughts raced ahead of his breath. Each time he reacted. Modern psychology would later call this emotional hijacking, the amygdala flooding the system, narrowing perception, pulling the mind into fight or flight. But the ancients knew it by another name. Loss of presence. Rivals learned his pattern quickly. A raised eyebrow was enough. A quiet insult, a pause before his name. He would step forward, voice sharpened, posture rigid. And in that moment, without a single strike, he had already lost. Because manipulation does not require power, only predictability. The warrior won duels but lost standing. He defended honor but surrendered control. He could not see the trap because his ego kept him facing outward, never inward. At night, alone, the victories felt thin. His breath remained shallow even in rest. His thoughts replayed conversations more than battles. Neuroscience would say his nervous system never returned to baseline, always alert, always braced, always available to be pulled. He believed fear was something to crush, but fear, ignored, simply learned to speak through anger. One winter morning, an elder assigned him a task meant for novices, cleaning floors while others trained. Laughter rippled quietly through the hall. The warrior felt heat rise behind his eyes. He accepted the task, but his movements were violent, loud, performative. The elder watched without intervening. Later the lesson came, not as rebuke but as absence, no correction, no acknowledgement, just silence. That silence disturbed him more than insult ever had, because silence removes the mirror the ego depends on. The warrior began to sense it then, not clearly, not fully, but like pressure before a storm. Something unseen was shaping every encounter, something that had nothing to do with swords. An ancient system, one that fed on reaction, one that collapsed without it. Yet he did not know how to step out of it. His identity was built on response, on being provoked, proving, pushing back. Without opposition, he felt formless. This is where most warriors fail, not because they are weak, but because they are untrained where it matters most. The battlefield was not the courtyard. It was the space between stimulus and response, and he had never learned to stand there. Unaware that the war was internal, the warrior continued forward. until exhaustion, not defeat, forced him toward the silence he feared most. The breaking point did not arrive as failure. It arrived as fatigue, a deep bone-level exhaustion that sleep could not touch. The warrior began to notice the pattern he had refused to name. Every interaction felt like combat. Every conversation carried an edge. His shoulders remained tense, even in prayer. His breath shortened before words were spoken, as if the body already knew what the mind refused to admit. He was always preparing to defend something. Not his life, not his honor, but his image. The ancients understood what modern neuroscience now confirms. The ego is not a stable structure. It is a process maintained through constant feedback, comparison, and validation. Remove the stimulus, and it panics. Threaten its narrative, and it lashes out. That was the true source of his anger. One evening, during a ceremonial gathering, a respected rival spoke calmly while dismantling the warrior's recent decisions. The words were measured, polite, irrefutable. The hall remained quiet, eyes drifting toward the warrior, waiting for reaction. His pulse surged, his jaw tightened. He felt the familiar urge, interrupt, correct, dominate the moment. Years of conditioning screamed at him to act. Instead, something unusual happened. He hesitated, just a fraction of a breath longer than normal. In that gap, he noticed the sensation, not the story, not the insult, but the physical reality. Heat in the chest, pressure behind the eyes, a tightening in the throat. Fear. Not fear of defeat, fear of losing control over how he was seen. That awareness changed nothing immediately. He still spoke, still defended, still reacted, but once seen, the mechanism could not be unseen. From that night forward, the warrior began to observe his own mind like an enemy scout. He noticed how certain words bypassed reason and struck directly at the nervous system, how certain people never attacked directly, only suggested, implied, waited. Manipulators rarely push. They pull, they create empty space, and let your ego rush to fill it. The warrior started losing on purpose, small losses, letting comments pass unanswered, allowing misunderstandings to linger, not correcting every false assumption. Each time, the discomfort was sharp, the ego demanded resolution, but something else happened as well. The storm passed, heart rate slowed, breath returned. The body learned that silence was survivable. Modern psychology calls this distress tolerance, the ability to remain present without impulsive action. Ancient systems called it discipline of spirit. Still, the cost was high. Others mistook his restraint for weakness. Rivals grew bolder, subtle tests intensified. The pressure increased, as it always does when a system senses it is losing leverage. And for a time, the warrior doubted himself. But beneath the doubt, something steadier began to form. A quiet awareness that reaction had never protected him, only exposed him. That every emotional outburst had been an invitation, not a defense. He realized then, manipulators do not create fear, they locate it. And where fear lives unchecked, presence cannot exist. This understanding did not make him strong yet. It made him empty, stripped of old reflexes, uncertain of who he was without constant response. That emptiness frightened him more than any rival, because emptiness demands reconstruction, and reconstruction requires guidance. Soon after, without announcement or ceremony, the warrior left the compound. No farewell, no justification, only a sense, quiet but undeniable, that to master others, he would first need to encounter someone who had already mastered himself. Drawn by exhaustion and intuition rather than ambition, the warrior walked toward the mountains, where a mentor awaited who taught not through instruction, but through silence. Chapter 2. The Mentor Who Spoke Through Silence. The mountain did not welcome him. It stood indifferent, stone layered upon stone, pine needles damp with fog, air thin enough to punish impatience. Each step upward stripped something away. Words, justifications, old stories about who he thought he was. By the time he reached the dwelling, his breath had slowed, not from mastery but from surrender. The mentor lived where ambition could not survive. No banners, no students waiting, no symbols of rank. Only a small wooden structure pressed against rock, as if it had grown there by accident. The old man did not ask his name, did not ask why he had come, did not invite him inside. He simply turned and walked away. The warrior followed. Days passed without instruction. The mentor moved with deliberate economy, no wasted gestures, no hurried steps. He gathered water, repaired wood, sat for long stretches facing nothing in particular. When he spoke, it was only to point at what needed doing. Clean. Carry. Wait. At first, the warrior resisted internally. His mind searched for meaning, for technique, for hidden lessons. This frustration was familiar. The same agitation he felt when manipulators withheld response, the same tightening in the chest. The mentor noticed everything, commented on nothing. Modern science would describe what was happening as nervous system recalibration. Removed from stimulation, the mind turns inward. Deprived of reaction loops, the brain begins to expose its dependencies. The ancients called it fasting from noise. On the seventh morning, the mentor finally spoke more than a word. "You move too quickly," he said, watching the warrior set down a bowl. "Not with your body, with your need." The warrior felt the sting immediately, not because it was harsh, but because it was precise. The mentor continued, voice even. "Manipulators survive on three hungers: the hunger to be seen, the hunger to not lose, the hunger to be right." He paused. "Which one owns you?" The question landed heavier than any accusation. The warrior had no answer that did not feel like exposure. Silence returned. That afternoon, the mentor demonstrated nothing. Instead, he allowed the warrior to observe him interacting with a passing trader. The trader spoke quickly, exaggerated hardship, hinted at obligation. The mentor listened without interruption. His posture did not shift. His breath did not change. When the trader finished, the mentor waited, long enough for discomfort to bloom. Then he spoke, brief, neutral, unmoved. He accepted nothing, rejected nothing. The trader left unsettled, uncertain of what had just occurred. The mentor turned to the warrior. "He wanted leverage," he said. "I gave him space." This was the first true lesson. Manipulation collapses in emptiness. Neuroscience confirms it. Emotional regulation in one individual destabilizes dysregulation in another. A calm nervous system interrupts dominance games. Predictability vanishes when reaction disappears. That night, sitting by the fire, the warrior felt something unfamiliar. Relief. No performance required. No stance to defend. No image to maintain. Just presence. But presence, once felt, reveals how rarely it has been lived. The mentor spoke once more before sleep. "Strength that must announce itself is already weak," he said. "Tomorrow you will learn how to disappear without running." The warrior lay awake long after the fire dimmed, realizing that everything he had called discipline before was merely effort. What awaited him now was something colder, quieter, far more demanding. As silence stripped away his reflex to react, the warrior prepared to confront the most dangerous opponent yet. The need to prove his own strength. The days that followed blurred into rhythm. Wake before light, draw water. Sit without purpose, work without commentary. Sleep when the body, not the mind, agreed. The mentor corrected nothing directly. Instead, he altered the environment. Tasks were repeated until the warrior stopped trying to complete them efficiently and began completing them attentively. This was not training the body. It was reconditioning the nervous system. Modern behavioral science would call it extinction learning, breaking the association between stimulus and habitual response. The ancients had no term for it. They simply lived it. One morning, the mentor placed a cracked cup before the warrior and poured tea until it overflowed onto the floor. The warrior moved to stop him. The mentor raised a hand. "You see waste," he said, "because you see outcome, not process." The tea spilled, the floor darkened, nothing else happened. Later, the mentor explained, "Manipulators depend on your urgency, your need to prevent loss, your reflex to intervene. Remove urgency, and their system starves." The warrior began to notice it in himself. the impulse to correct, to clarify, to secure position. Each impulse carried tension, each tension carried fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing ground, fear of not mattering. The mentor did not soothe these fears. He let them surface fully, let the warrior sit with them until sensation separated from story. This was the discipline of silence. Not the absence of speech, but the absence of unnecessary reaction. One afternoon, the mentor finally tested him. A group of visitors arrived, officials from a nearby province. They spoke politely, but their eyes measured. Their questions were framed as compliments. Their tone was cooperative. Their intent was not. They ignored the mentor and addressed the warrior directly. A familiar tactic, elevation before extraction. They asked about his training, his background, his ambitions. Each question invited him to define himself, to narrow his identity into something that could later be used against him. The warrior felt the pull immediately. The old reflex surged. Explain, impress, align. He remembered the trader, the space, the waiting. So he slowed his breath. He answered simply. No embellishment, no defense. He allowed pauses to exist, allowed silence to do its work. The officials grew restless. They filled the gaps themselves. Assumptions surfaced. Contradictions appeared. Their system required engagement. Without it, it malfunctioned. When they left, unsatisfied and unsettled, the mentor said nothing. He did not need to. That night, the warrior understood something essential. Manipulators are not powerful because they act. They are powerful because others react. Remove the reaction, and their actions echo back at them. Neuroscience supports this. Dominance hierarchies rely on feedback loops. Interrupt the loop, and status signals collapse. Calm becomes destabilizing. Stillness becomes authority. The mentor spoke one final time before the warrior's departure. You do not defeat manipulators, he said. You outgrow them. You become too grounded to move. The warrior bowed, not out of submission, but recognition. He was not leaving with strategies. He was leaving with a state, a regulated nervous system, an ego no longer desperate for validation, a presence that did not seek to be felt. As he descended the mountain, he sensed it clearly. The world would test him again, more aggressively this time. But now he would not meet pressure with resistance. He would meet it with gravity. Carrying silence instead of armor, the warrior returned to the world, ready to walk among manipulators without being seen and without being moved. Chapter 3, Walking the Path Without Being Seen. The world had not changed. The same corridors of influence, the same rituals of status, the same quiet games played behind polite words. Only the warrior had. When he returned, no announcement followed him. No posture declared transformation. He moved as he had been taught, economical, unremarkable, grounded. Those who remembered his former intensity sensed something missing and searched for it instinctively. Manipulators always do. The first test came from an old rival who once needed only a raised eyebrow to pull him off balance. This time the tactic evolved. The rival praised him publicly, then corrected him gently, planting doubt where certainty once stood. A classic maneuver. Create gratitude. Introduce authority. Withdraw approval. The warrior felt the invitation. The familiar tightening flickered, then passed. He noted it the way one notes weather, without judgment, without urgency. He did not correct the statement. He did not defend his position. He thanked the rival and fell silent. The room shifted. Social psychology confirms it. When expected status behavior fails to appear, observers experience cognitive dissonance. The hierarchy destabilizes. Attention moves toward the calm one. The rival continued speaking, filling the vacuum with explanations no one had asked for. The warrior listened, not as a strategy, but as a state. Later that day, a different manipulator approached through guilt, reminded him of old favors, shared disappointment cloaked as concern. The warrior acknowledged the emotion without accepting the frame. I understand, he said. Then he stopped. No promise, no justification, no submission. The manipulator waited for continuation. None came. The pause did the work. Neuroscience shows that regulated individuals unconsciously entrain others toward regulation, or reveal their dysregulation when they resist it. The warrior watched as impatience surfaced, then irritation. The system cracked. False authority came next. An elder invoked tradition, rank, and consequence. The warrior bowed respectfully, listened fully, and declined without explanation. The elder bristled. "You misunderstand your place," he said. The warrior met his eyes, steady, without challenge. "I understand my responsibility," he replied. "Nothing more. Power does not need to expand. It needs to anchor." What the mentor had taught him now revealed its depth. Silence was not absence, it was containment. Discipline was not rigidity, it was freedom from impulse. Presence was not intensity, it was coherence. Each encounter followed the same pattern. Manipulation attempted escalation. The warrior refused entry. Without opposition, the manipulator was forced to confront himself. Some withdrew, some grew hostile. Some collapsed quietly, or lost leverage. The warrior began to notice a deeper shift. His internal state no longer spiked with external pressure. Heart rate remained steady. Breath deepened under scrutiny. The prefrontal cortex stayed online, as modern science would describe it, allowing choice where there had once been reflex. This was mastery in motion, not domination, not withdrawal, but grounded engagement without attachment. He spoke less. When he did, words landed heavier, not because they were sharp, but because they were aligned. The warrior understood now. Unpredictability does not come from chaos. It comes from discipline. When reactions are no longer automatic, manipulation becomes guesswork. And guesswork is weakness. He had not defeated anyone, yet his path cleared itself. As his presence began to reshape the dynamics around him, the warrior faced a final truth. Freedom from manipulation is not an endpoint, but a way of being. With time, the test became subtler. Manipulation rarely survives in open air. When direct tactics fail, it evolves inward. It shifts from confrontation to confusion, from pressure to suggestion. The warrior began noticing half-truths placed carefully in his path. Information delivered late, praise offered through others, criticism delivered indirectly. Attempts not to move him, but to shape how others perceived him. This was the final layer of the game. Control the narrative, and you control the man. In the past, this would have ignited him. He would have corrected, clarified, countered. Now he did something else. Nothing. He continued his work, maintained consistency, let outcomes speak where words once would have rushed in. Behavioral science calls this reputational inertia. Stable patterns outweigh isolated signals over time. Manipulators depend on immediate correction to amplify uncertainty. Without reaction, their distortions lose momentum. Some allies grew uneasy. "Why do you let them say these things?" one asked quietly. The warrior answered with care, "Because truth that needs defense is not yet strong." This was not detachment, it was trust in coherence. The more he remained unmoved, the more the manipulators revealed themselves. In meetings, they over-explained. In private, they sought reassurance. Their masks slipped, not because he exposed them, but because he no longer supported the structure that held the mask in place. The ancient system turned inward on itself. Neuroscience confirms this collapse. Dominance behavior requires reciprocal engagement. Without feedback, the brain escalates, then fatigues, cortisol rises, errors increase, self-sabotage follows. The warrior saw it clearly. Those who once controlled rooms now spoke too much. Those who once watched silently now fidgeted. Those who once dictated terms now sought alignment. Presence had inverted the hierarchy. But the most important transformation was internal. He no longer measured success by outcomes. He measured alignment. He no longer tracked others' approval. He tracked his own breath. He no longer feared silence. He inhabited it. This made him dangerous in a way no aggression ever could, because he could walk away without resentment. He could stay without attachment. He could speak without needing to win. One final confrontation came, not from a manipulator, but from a mirror. An opportunity arose that promised elevation, recognition, influence. The terms were subtle but clear. Compromise presence for position. React to play along. Perform strength instead of embodying it. The old hunger stirred faintly. He noticed it, acknowledged it, let it pass, and declined, not loudly, not righteously, simply completely. In that moment, the transformation sealed itself. He understood now that manipulators are teachers, unwilling ones. They reveal where discipline is weak, where ego still seeks validation, where fear hides behind ambition. When those places are healed, manipulation loses its function. The warrior did not announce his mastery. He did not need to. His stillness spoke for him. His consistency drew others into regulation. His presence created order without command. This is how ancient systems persist, not through force, but through coherence. The path no longer required defense. It simply existed beneath his feet. Having stepped beyond reaction and resistance, the warrior approached the final threshold, where mastery is no longer about others, but about freedom from the need to oppose them at all. Chapter 4. Mastery Beyond Victory. In time, the warrior stopped naming what others were doing. Manipulation, control, strategy. These words lost their gravity, not because the behaviors disappeared, but because they no longer reached him. He moved through rooms without scanning for threat. Conversations unfolded without internal rehearsal. His body no longer braced for impact where none was required. The nervous system, once tuned to vigilance, now rested in readiness. There is a difference. Vigilance consumes, readiness observes. Ancient texts describe this state as centeredness. Modern neuroscience would describe it as baseline regulation, when the mind no longer burns energy predicting danger that does not exist. The warrior had crossed that threshold. He remembered the mentor's final teaching, once cryptic, now precise. Do not aim to break systems, become incompatible with them. Opposition keeps systems alive. Resistance validates the game. Freedom lives elsewhere. When manipulators encountered him now, they sensed it immediately, not as intimidation, but as absence of access. Their tactics slid off without friction. There was nothing to grip, no hunger for approval, no fear of exclusion, no urgency to define himself. His ego had not been destroyed. It had been demoted. Now it served function, not identity. This is the quiet truth ancient warriors guarded closely. The self that must be defended is already compromised. The self that does not negotiate its core requires no defense at all. Authority began to find him without pursuit. Others sought his counsel, not because he asserted dominance, but because his presence stabilized them. His silence clarified. His words, when spoken, landed with uncommon weight. Behavioral science confirms this phenomenon. Humans unconsciously orient toward those with emotional coherence. Calm becomes leadership. Regulation becomes gravity. He did not correct others often. He did not expose manipulators publicly. He did not seek justice through confrontation. He trusted entropy. Systems built on fear collapse under time. Systems built on presence endure. There came a moment, a final echo of the past, when a powerful figure attempted one last move. An offer wrapped in respect, carrying conditions that would slowly erode autonomy. The old version of the warrior would have analyzed, negotiated, positioned himself. The new one listened, felt no tightening, no excitement, no threat. He declined, not to oppose, but to remain aligned. The figure pressed, explained consequences, implied isolation. The warrior smiled faintly. "Then I will walk alone," he said, and meant it. This was not courage, it was sovereignty. To be sovereign is not to control others. It is to be unmovable in one's inner state, regardless of external pressure. The Stoics called it ataraxia. The Zen monks called it suchness. Modern psychology calls it self-differentiation. Different names, same mastery. As the seasons turned, the warrior's life simplified. Fewer words, clearer commitments, less noise, more depth. He did not withdraw from the world, but he was no longer entangled in it. Manipulators faded from relevance, not defeated, not exposed. Outgrown. This is the final paradox. When you stop seeking freedom from control, you discover you have been free all along. The path does not end in triumph. It ends in peace. With opposition dissolved and identity anchored within, the warrior stood at the final realization. Mastery is not what you do to the world, but how completely you belong to yourself. In the quiet that followed, nothing dramatic happened. No final battle, no public recognition, no moment carved into legend. And that was the proof. The warrior woke each morning without tension. He moved through his days without internal argument. Decisions arose from clarity, not pressure. When conflict appeared, it no longer demanded resolution. It resolved itself through his steadiness. This is the state ancient systems were designed to produce. Not fighters, not conquerors, but unshakable men. The mentor's presence remained, not as memory, but as function. Every time the warrior paused before speaking, every time he felt emotion without obeying it, every time he allowed silence to complete what words once tried to force. Neuroscience explains what philosophy long observed. When the nervous system is regulated, perception widens, choices multiply, compulsion dissolves. What once felt personal reveals itself as pattern. Manipulators did not disappear from the world, they simply lost relevance in his. Their fear-based systems could not attach to a man who did not seek validation, advantage, or dominance. Their silence could not threaten one who lived comfortably within it. Their pressure could not move one whose center was internal. Strength had become quiet. Authority had become natural. Presence had become permanent. Others sensed it. Some tried to imitate it. Few understood the cost. Because mastery demands sacrifice, not of comfort but of ego. The willingness to release the need to be seen as strong, to be right, to win. The warrior had paid that price. He no longer explained himself to those committed to misunderstanding. He no longer corrected those invested in distortion. He no longer chased alignment from those who thrived on imbalance. This was not detachment from humanity. It was respect for reality. The ancient system had completed its work. Discipline was no longer effort, it was identity. Silence was no longer strategy, it was home. Presence was no longer cultivated, it was lived. And in that state, something subtle occurred. People around him began to regulate themselves. Conversations slowed, conflicts softened, decisions clarified. Not because he instructed them, but because coherence is contagious. This is the hidden transmission presence and path has always pointed toward. You do not change the world by force. You change it by embodying what cannot be manipulated. The warrior did not call himself free. Freedom does not need naming. He simply walked his path, unmoved by fear, uninterested in ego games, immune to systems built on control. And that is how manipulators are finally broken. Not by confrontation, not by exposure, not by dominance, but by becoming so internally sovereign that their path cannot intersect with yours. A disciplined presence dissolves manipulation because those who master themselves cannot be controlled by fear, ego, or silence turned against them.